254 people. One day. That is the death toll from Israeli strikes on Lebanon on April 9, 2026, the single deadliest day of attacks on Lebanese territory since the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran was announced less than 48 hours before. Beirut's southern suburbs, the Bekaa Valley, southern Lebanon around Bint Jbeil, residential areas, commercial streets, all of it, in coordinated waves while the ink on the ceasefire agreement was still drying. Iran signed that agreement. Iran honored it. Iran has not launched a single verified strike on Israel or U.S. forces since the deal was made. And this is what happened in return. But what Iran does next, the specific warning its armed forces issued on April 10th, and the exact condition they named that would make them walk away from the entire agreement, is the story that changes everything about the next 14 days. The ceasefire that Iran accepted on April 8th, less than 2 hours before the U.S. deadline expired, was always a partial agreement. Everyone involved understood that. The terms covered Iran specifically: no offensive operations, Hormuz reopens to safe transit, talks begin in Islamabad. 2 weeks. Lebanon was explicitly excluded. The IDF Chief of Staff said so publicly on April 8th, the same day the ceasefire was announced. Sources tracking the IDF's operational posture confirm the strikes on Lebanon's southern suburbs that night were pre-authorized. The target packages built, the aircraft ready, the window calculated in advance. The moment the Iran ceasefire removed the risk of Iranian retaliation, the Lebanon operation accelerated. 254 people killed in the first full day. Then 10 more Hezbollah launch sites struck on April 9th and 10th after Hezbollah rocket fire toward Israel. Commanders eliminated. The Lebanese Resistance Brigade's commander Maher Qassem Hamdan killed in the Cheba area. Islamic Jihad operative Abd al-Rahman Ammar Hassan Khudari, identified as an October 7th infiltrator, killed in a separate strike. Iran watched all of this while honoring its side of the agreement. And on April 10th, Iran's armed forces issued a statement that has not been adequately reported in any Western outlet. If the strikes on Lebanon continue, Iran reserves the right to respond, not vaguely, with a specific time frame, with a specific condition. That condition, and what crossing it would do to the Islamabad talks that begin Friday, is what this script is actually about. The threshold Iran named is this: continued Israeli strikes on Lebanon that result in mass civilian casualties constitute a violation of the spirit of the ceasefire agreement. And Iran will not remain bound by an agreement the other side is using as cover to wage a parallel war on the resistance axis. That framing is not emotional, it is legal. And it was constructed deliberately. Sources familiar with Iranian diplomatic doctrine confirm that Iran's armed forces statement on April 10th was not improvised. It was drafted to create a specific international argument that a ceasefire which one party uses to escalate operations against a third party connected to the other is not a ceasefire at all. It is a tactical pause that one side is honoring and the other side is exploiting. Iran's position, articulated to the UN through back channels according to analysts tracking the engagement, is that the 254 deaths in Lebanon on April 9th represent exactly the kind of escalation the ceasefire was designed to prevent, and that continuing them removes Iran's legal and moral obligation to remain bound. The IDF strikes that killed 254 people hit Beirut's southern suburbs, densely populated areas where Hezbollah infrastructure is embedded in residential and commercial zones. The strikes were coordinated, multi-wave, across 3 geographic theaters simultaneously: Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, and the south around Bint Jbeil. All of it confirmed, all of it documented, all of it happening while Iran held its fire. And simultaneously, on the same days, Iran's IRGC issued a separate statement confirming that it had not launched a single missile or drone during the ceasefire hours, not one. The IRGC's denial was explicit, on the record, attributed. The Gulf states claimed otherwise in a UN letter. The IRGC said, "Prove it. Nobody has." The framing Iran chose for its warning reveals what Iran believes the ceasefire actually is. The U.S. presented the agreement publicly as Iran accepting a pause because it had been left with no options. 80% of its air defenses destroyed, 90% of its conventional navy eliminated, its leadership systematically targeted, its missile production functionally defeated. That framing positions the ceasefire as a surrender negotiated under overwhelming military pressure. Iran's framing is structurally different. Iran presented the ceasefire as a strategic choice, a decision to accept a temporary halt in exchange for specific conditions, with the explicit understanding that those conditions could be revoked if the other side acted in bad faith. The difference between those two framings is not semantic. It determines whether Iran has any leverage in Islamabad. If the ceasefire is a defeat, if Iran accepted it because it had no options, then Iran walks into Islamabad with nothing. It accepts whatever terms it's given. If the ceasefire is a strategic choice, if Iran can credibly threaten to walk away, then Iran walks into Islamabad as a party with something to lose and something to offer. The nuclear program, the missile program, the Hormuz toll, the proxy network, all of those become negotiating assets rather than surrendered positions. The 254 deaths in Lebanon gave Iran the argument it needed to maintain the second framing. The strikes are a documented provocation that Iran can point to and say, "We are the party honoring this agreement. They are the party using it as cover." And that argument, regardless of what anyone in Washington or Jerusalem says about it, is now in the UN record. 254 people in one day. Let the number land for a moment before moving past it. Lebanese health authorities confirmed the toll to Reuters and AP. The strikes hit Beirut's southern suburbs, neighborhoods where families live above the organizations that the IDF was targeting. The distinction between a Hezbollah command center and the apartment building above it is not always visible from the air. On April 9th, that distinction collapsed 254 times. 10 additional Hezbollah launch sites were struck on April 9th and 10th, after Hezbollah fired rockets toward Israel in response to the earlier wave. The cycle, strikes, rocket response, more strikes, more casualties, is exactly the escalation spiral that anyone who understood the Lebanon exclusion predicted would happen within 72 hours of the ceasefire announcement. In the Jiyeh district of Beirut's southern suburbs, the densely populated neighborhood that bore the heaviest strikes on April 9th, a Lebanese schoolteacher in her 40s who has lived in the same building for 22 years describes to Al Jazeera correspondents what the overnight wave sounded like from inside her apartment on the 4th floor. She says the explosions didn't come one at a time. They came in clusters, 3 or 4 in rapid succession, then a pause, then more. She says the pauses were worse than the explosions because she spent every pause wondering if it was over or if it was just the space between. She says she counted 11 clusters before she stopped counting. 11 clusters, one night, one neighborhood. And the strategic implication of those 11 clusters is this: Hezbollah absorbed that strike wave and still fired rockets toward Israel the next morning. The organization did not collapse. The command structure did not freeze. The decision to respond was made and executed within hours. 254 deaths did not end the Lebanon campaign. They accelerated it. The separate Iranian operation running on the same days as the Lebanon strikes is the Hormuz crypto toll, and its connection to the Lebanon escalation is not coincidental. Let that sit for a moment. Iran announced on April 9th, the same day Israel killed 254 people in Lebanon, that vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz are now required to pay a 1 per barrel cryptocurrency toll, not a traditional financial payment. Cryptocurrency, specifically, a payment routed through a financial infrastructure that U.S. sanctions cannot easily intercept. The timing is not accidental. Sources familiar with IRGC economic warfare doctrine confirm that the crypto toll announcement was prepared in advance and held for a moment of maximum strategic utility. a moment when Iran needed to demonstrate to the world and to Islamabad that it still controls Hormuz and still has economic leverage that functions independently of the ceasefire agreement. The $1 per barrel toll on global oil transit is not primarily a revenue mechanism. It is a signal. It says, we signed a ceasefire, we honored the ceasefire, and we still control the choke point that 20% of the world's oil supply depends on. If you use the ceasefire as cover to slaughter 254 people in Beirut, the cost of that choice will be measured in barrels. Shipping traffic through Hormuz on April 10th remained, in the words of analysts tracking the engagement, at a trickle. The tankers that moved when the ceasefire was announced are moving slowly. Some are waiting again. Iran didn't close Hormuz. It put a price on it. And that price is payable only in cryptocurrency that sanctions cannot reach. On April 10th, every capital doing the math on this ceasefire came up with a different number. In Washington, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group holds position in the Arabian Sea. C-17 Globemaster III flights continue the airlift. Fighters, cargo, equipment cycling into the Middle East theater. CENTCOM issues an update on Operation Epic Fury. The message from the Pentagon is unchanged. Objectives met. Readiness maintained. Resumption possible within hours. But the Islamabad talks that were supposed to begin this Friday are facing a question nobody has publicly answered. Can two sides negotiate a lasting settlement over Iran's nuclear and missile programs while one of those sides is conducting the deadliest single-day attack on Lebanon since the ceasefire was signed? In Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait, a joint letter goes to the UN Security Council condemning Iranian missile and drone activity and asserting self-defense rights. Iran's IRGC responds with a categorical denial. Not one launch during ceasefire hours. The contradiction sits unresolved in the UN record. Every tanker operator in the Gulf is running the same calculation for the third time in a week. The crypto toll changes the math again. A $1 per barrel payment on a supertanker carrying 2 million barrels is $2 million per transit, payable in cryptocurrency, to Iran. Some operators are paying, some are waiting. The trickle continues. And Gaza, where the hospitals have been running on generator power for months, where the Rafah crossing has been closed, where the origin of this entire conflict sits in a silence that no ceasefire document addresses, is watching all of this. 254 people killed in Lebanon in one day, after a ceasefire was announced, after Iran signed it, after Iran honored it. The Lebanese health authorities who confirmed that number are not propaganda outlets. They are the same institutions that document casualties in every conflict, the same ones cited by Reuters and AP in their reporting. 254 is not a claim. It is a count. And the question that number forces, a question that nobody in the Western press is asking with the directness it deserves, is this: what exactly did the ceasefire buy for Lebanon? In the Bint Jbeil area of southern Lebanon, a farmer in his 60s who has worked the same land his father worked describes to Reuters correspondents what the April 9th strikes looked like from his hillside. He says he watched the smoke columns rise from the valley below. 7 of them, he counted, from different directions simultaneously. He says he has lived through 3 wars on this land. He says each time when the bombing stops, someone comes and tells the people it was necessary. He says he has stopped listening to the reasons. He just counts the columns of smoke and waits for them to stop. From Indonesia to Poland, from Nigeria to Argentina, from Malaysia to Turkey, hundreds of millions of people are watching Lebanon and feeling something that the word ceasefire does not capture. The world has seen enough of agreements that protect some people and exclude others, enough of pauses that one side uses to reload and the other side uses to bury, enough of 254 being a number in a news alert that disappears from the front page by morning. The resistance that Iran built, imperfect, costly, deeply human, is still standing in Beirut's southern suburbs this morning, still counting smoke columns, still waiting. 3 questions, no public answers, each one a potential detonator. First, the Islamabad threshold. Iran's armed forces said on April 10th that continued Lebanese civilian casualties could cause Iran to walk away from the ceasefire. Israel killed 254 people on April 9th and struck 10 more launch sites on April 9th and 10th. The Islamabad talks begin Friday. Nobody has publicly stated what number, what casualty count, what strike intensity would trigger Iran's withdrawal. That number exists. It hasn't been said out loud. Second, the crypto toll and the tankers. Shipping through Hormuz is at a trickle. Iran is demanding 1 per barrel in cryptocurrency. U.S. officials are reportedly frustrated. If tanker traffic does not increase before Friday, the economic dividend that the ceasefire was supposed to deliver, the one that made the deal politically viable in Washington, starts to disappear. That puts pressure on the U.S. side of the Islamabad table that nobody has publicly acknowledged. Third, Hezbollah's next move. The organization responded to April 9th's 254 deaths with rocket fire. Israel responded to the rocket fire with 10 more launch sites struck. That cycle has no natural stopping point written into any ceasefire document. What we know today, 254 people are dead in Lebanon. The ceasefire is technically in effect. What nobody knows, how many more before Iran walks out of Islamabad? What is certain, that answer is coming. Probably before the week is out. We'll be here. Don't leave now.